So starting with the first panel, with the large scale, the interpretation of the migration and mobilities. The world is moving and is one large space shaped by flow of people, goods, microorganisms, data, and ideas. So our first panel is titled The Nordic-Baltic Region in the Crossroads of Global Mobilities. What kind of global transactions are we experiencing now? What are the outer forces that shape the North? And more precisely, how do we position ourselves, meaning the Baltic Sea region, in the crossroads of worldwide circulation? What if we look at the planet by altering our habitual way? In the program, you see that we were looking to start with Ole Söderström, Professor of Human Geography at the University of Neuchâtel, researcher and editor based in Geneva, Switzerland. Unfortunately, in the beginning of the week, we received a message from him that after a 5-week Africa trip, he's unable to come and be with us. So we continue with the next speaker following the program, which is Kirsten Ritchie. It's my pleasure to introduce her. She's a consulting project director and principal at GENSLER, based in San Francisco, the United States. Kirsten Ritchie serves as one of the firm's leading sustainability ambassadors, championing helpful and forward-thinking design solutions and leading public discussion around innovative and high-performance design and operations. Kirsten's experience encompasses the workplace, retail, hospitality, education, transportation, aviation, and infrastructure sectors. She is a recognized authority in green product standards and sustainability rating systems. She serves on numerous boards and in other advisory positions, including roles with the Material and Technical Advisory Group at USGBC, Board of Directors at the Green Electronics Council, Board of the Ecological Building Network, and as an advisor to the Health Product Declaration Collaborative. Kirsten holds a BS in Civil Engineering from the University of California, Berkeley, and a MS in Civil Engineering from California State University, San Jose. Please welcome Kirsten with the talk, The New Economic Normal, Embracing Global Mobility, Tourism, and Sustainability for Local Prosperity.
Thanks. Good morning, all. Greetings from San Francisco, coming a long way from California. And yes, I'm here to talk to you today about the new economic normal, leveraging global mobility, tourism, and sustainability for local prosperity. Nice long title. Just by way of who I am, let's see if we get this work. Didn't press hard enough. Sorry about that. So I actually am, as I mentioned, from San Francisco. I'm a San Francisco native. And I have, I'm actually a product of migration. My father is German, from Hamburg, and he emigrated, needed new opportunities right after the war, and went to Mexico to work for an uncle, and then up to San Francisco, and ended up in the shipping business. And so was doing a lot of work and spoke Spanish and German and English, and traveled around and did a lot of work in Chile and Peru, getting tuna and working with actually Latvian and Estonian and actually Croatian fishermen who were down in that area of the world. And so he actually came and did a number of he was very engaged with BIMCO, which is the Baltic Maritime Organization, so we do have some connections. But back to myself in California, I work for GENSLER. GENSLER is a large architecture firm. How many of you have heard of GENSLER? Okay, a few of you. Well, we actually are the largest architecture firm in the world, all privately held, employee-owned. We are now about 6,000 architects. 2 years ago, we reached the threshold of $1 billion in revenues, to give you an idea of our scale. And I came to GENSLER about 13, 14 years ago. I am actually not an architect. I am an engineer. And I was brought into the firm to really help improve the ability of our projects and of our teams to improve the sustainable performance of projects. Because we do great design, wonderful for design, but there was really a recognition that we need to be more accountable to the performance, how we were really doing from an energy perspective, from a carbon perspective. So that has been my path at GENSLER, and I was made principal a few years into working there and have been loving it. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful company. So enough, as we are doing some social media, if you want to check me out, you can communicate email, Kirsten_Ritchie@gensler.com. Or alternatively, if you like LinkedIn, we're using that a lot more of a platform for connecting and sharing ideas. You can find me, that's Kirsten-Ritchie. It's one of those, tag names. I don't have the consistent ones across all the different platforms. Okay, so purpose of the talk today, as we mentioned, how are we going to leverage global mobility, tourism, and sustainability for local prosperity? And I really, I'm going to be talking about the positive side, I think. I'm hoping of migration. This is not forced. This is more the voluntary side. But the truth is that we are seeing huge growth. We know this, growth of the population in the world. And we've gone from, in the last 100 years, almost a 4-fold increase in population. It is fortunately starting to level out. We're flattening. Where's my pointer? Oop. Okay, where'd it go? There we are. It's forecast to flatten out, which is good, but there's still a lot of people in this world. And what's even been more interesting is the fact, I haven't controlled my pointer yet. There we go. Is the migration of people from the rural to the urban. If you look at, basically 75 years ago in 1950, we had about 2.5 billion people on the planet. And of that, less than a third were in the cities, and 2/3 were rural. If you look at our time period right now, 2013, 2015, 2018, in that time frame, you can see how we've had both, of course, the huge increase in population, but the movement of people into the city. And it's projected that you can see by 2050, almost 2/3 of the people will be living in cities away from the rural community. More specifically, by 2050, we estimate that 75% of people are going to be living in cities. Why is this happening? Well, a lot of it has to do with technology. Really, the evolution of technology. And being from San Francisco, kind of the heart of Silicon Valley, the heart of technology, we live it and we see it and experience it every day. With the accelerating rate of technology, you are getting more rapid economic development, you are getting globalization, and that really is driving the urbanization. And expressed more cleanly, you can see all the, what's happened with technology and how it's evolved. Back in the, 1850s, we had the development of the telegraph. So people could start to communicate, message back and forth. You didn't have to be next to somebody. We then had, basically in the 1890s, the advent of the telephone. And you could talk. It wasn't just using code. You could actually use voice to connect to people. So you didn't have to be next to them immediately to get work done or to communicate or to share stories. You had the advent of the radio. We then get to the 1900s, of course, the automobile, and how that really suddenly changed rather dramatically the distances you could travel, what you could do there. You no longer you could live far away from work, or you could go and you could travel, visit family. You didn't have to be living close to them. In the kind of mid-1930s, we had the development of the airplane, the jetliner, which people could actually fly on. This was not military anymore. This was really for travel. And then you had the development of the personal computer in the 1960s, with then the advent of the laptop in the 70s, right? We then have the development of the iPhone. So I have all the stuff, that I can do in this little device right now. And then, of course, we have the evolution of the social media networks, like Facebook, which really shifted things up because you were communicating with everybody. You could now know that I've got friends around the world, and I'm in close contact with them. So what this has done, it's really changed where and how we work. We are no longer tethered to the desk. We don't have to be at the office to do our work. We can be sitting in hotel lobbies. We can be outside. We can be doing, in neighboring cities or out in the farms. Excuse me. We don't have to be in a particular location to get our work done. That's made a huge difference in how people are moving around. Well, I'm having problems here. Excuse me. Okay. Giving you the way home my show. No, it's going the wrong way. Okay. Sorry about that. Great way to start the show. It's changing how we buy. You no longer have to go to the department store. You have thousands of department stores, again, in your phone, right? And so what does that mean? That means you can shop from anywhere. You can buy from anywhere. You have much more control. You also have much more freedom in the array of things that you can buy. And it's changing how we travel. One is making it kind of easier, safer. You can find all the different flight options. You can figure out where you want to go. You can do everything again by your phone or your laptop. You check in. You do that quite easily. But also more importantly, and this is what we're seeing a lot, like I said, I have two boys in their 20s, and they have friends, as I mentioned, around the world. And whether they're twitching with them, whether they're Facebooking with them, saying, I want to go and I want to go, I want to visit this country, and I feel a lot safer because I know somebody there. And it's really opened up this opportunity for us to go to places that we would not be comfortable to before. And we are seeing it in the growth of international travel. Huge increases in travel. If you look in the last 20 years, we've gone from basically international travelers of about 400 million a year to 1.4 billion people moving around every year, taking trips. And with them, they are bringing into those local economies on the average of about $1,000 per guest coming into the country. $1.4 trillion now in revenue that's associated with people traveling. They're migrating on their own, short or long term, but that's kind of what is really happening. It's pretty amazing. And why is that happening? One of the key switches that we're seeing, people are not buying stuff. They're spending their money on experience. It's not about how big my house is or how fancy my car is how many visa stamps do I have in my passport, right? It's wanting to really go to how many different countries I've been to, how many different, what do my Instagram feed look like? People really want to have experience because they know at the end of the day, that's all you're really going to be able to take with you anyways. And having those experiences are really phenomenal. You see just the huge change there. Now, of course, if you sell products, this doesn't make you so happy. But if you are in the service business, and we really are seeing more and more people going to the service business, this is a really positive trend. And so why are people traveling? If you get the breakdown, it's interesting. You always say, well, they're traveling for work. And actually, overall, only about 13% of the trips are taken internationally are for business or professional travel. 27% are for VFR, visiting family and friends, which I always thought, everybody's going, if you're traveling, it's because you've got family and friends. It's a significant portion, but not the big picture. The big picture is people are choosing to make trips for leisure, for recreation, for holidays. Over 56% of the trips that are taken are people saying, I want to go do this. This is fun. This is part of my life. And how are they doing that? They want to travel to change. They want to be able to live like a local, quest for authenticity and transformation. It's really hugely important. The importance of, I want to go visit another place, but I want it to be authentically local. I don't want to experience the same thing at every place. I want, if I'm going to buy things, I want things to be local. I want them to be reflective of that character. I want difference. We don't want the same thing. They travel to show. Again, I mentioned this Instagrammable moments. Pursuit of a healthy life. More and more, we're seeing people traveling for health benefits. They want to take hiking tours, or they're doing hut hopping in the Alps, or they're going to be doing a spa course in Bali. Then also just the rise of access economy. It's a lot easier for me to get to places, and so I just want to explore and I want to learn. Solo travel and multi-generation travel. That's also very interesting. It used to be you have couples and families who travel, and now we have a lot more solo travelers, women traveling on their own a lot. And then also multi-generational. So you've got kids with grandparents taking trips. And I think those are the things we also have to account for as we design our local areas to be able to benefit from these travel types, but also make it really welcoming for these people. And then also for me, which is really interesting, being a director of sustainable design, the rising awareness of sustainability. And people are really doing things like taking ecotourism trips, working on preserving the wildlife of turtles, or helping to remove and deal with plastic issues in our oceans. And also just on climate change. Really, what can we do to help that? And what is that doing in terms of really how is it helping local economies prosper? Well, the truth is that travel and tourism overall represents about 10.4% of the global domestic product, the gross domestic product for the world, which is rather noticeable, significant. And about 319 million jobs. In general, the global economy is growing by 3% a year. Tourism and travel about 4% a year. And that 1% difference compounded starts to make a real big difference overall. And that 1 in every 5 new jobs is coming from travel and tourism. There's a lot going on here, really a lot that can be taken advantage of from a travel and tourism and migration perspective. In the United States, being American, I'll talk about it, they actually, we quantify a lot of this information, we really figure it out, and we recognize that 7.8% of the total economy is associated with tourism. Basically 14 million jobs, and the international visitor impact into the United States is close to $200 billion in the US. But Europe actually is bigger. In Europe, the impact of tourism is about $570 billion in Europe alone. It represents this data shows from the year previously, it's gone up 5%. You can see you're having kind of continuous trends in growth of both visitors as well as revenue. You had 710 million international visitors into Europe last year. And if you look at more closely the different regions, you're saying, well, yeah, but that's probably England or Germany. Well, very interestingly, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, that's what your countries of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are considered part of Central Eastern Europe, as well as these others. Last year, you had a 5% increase in tourist arrivals, and you had 9% increase in revenue from that tourism. And you can get all this information, the International Tourism Highlights. This is produced biannually by the World Tourism Organization, which is part of the UN. And they do great work if you really want to check this all out. Now, I know this is kind of like an eye chart, really hard to read, but this breaks it down by country of how everybody is doing. And if you look here in Central Europe, there we are. In Estonia last year, so this is information from actually trends the last few years. Estonia last year, you actually had a little bit of a reduction in your visitor change, basically 0.3% drop. But you actually had an increase, about 9% increase in tourism revenues. So you had a couple smaller people, but you were making more money per person showing up. Latvia, same thing, a little bit less decrease, about 0.2%. And again, the same thing, close to a 9% increase in revenue. The big winner in terms of increase of visitors, close to 10% increase in visitors, is Lithuania. So what are you guys doing in Lithuania to get all these more people to come? Pretty interesting. You also had revenue increases about 3%. So, if you start to take a look at this information, but what we were talking about, people wanting to have different kinds of experiences and going different places, who would have thought of it? Georgia saw a 23% increase in tourists last year. 23% in Georgia, right? Where was another one that was pretty interesting was, who else is big up there? Kazakhstan at 18%. Moldova at 19%. So these are places 3, 4, 5 years ago people would have been very uncomfortable going to, but clearly there's interest, there's comfort, there's accessibility. Somebody went before, you're Facebook friends with them, you can get that information. You want to go and you explore. And it could be short-term and it may eventually be for long-term. How are they getting there? How are people moving around? And the truth is, yes, many people go by road, and a lot is actually bus. We have some by train. One will keep on hoping that this will get more and more and more as we have more trains. Some by water. The cruise industry is growing rather significantly. This is not your private yachts. This is the big boats. But by far and away, how people are getting to and from when they're traveling internationally is on an airplane. And why is this also important? To figure out where people are coming from. It used to be that the 10 largest markets, US was number 1, followed by China, followed by UK, by Spain, Japan, Germany, India, Italy, France, Indonesia. We now see projected by 2030, well actually let's first look at 2025, you see China's overtaking the United States. That's understandable. It's got 10 times our population. One would expect that they're going to have more international travelers going outbound than us. And they are. As the economy is rising, as they are wealthier, as they have more independence, you're seeing people move, and they're fully going to take over the U.S. But one of the things that's really interesting, I find, is unfortunately, kind of the trend drop down UK. Now, this is all kind of relative. So you're actually going to have more travelers from UK. It's just compared to all these people that are coming from these other areas that their rank goes down. What's amazing, if you look at what's happening in India, same thing, kind of like much more so than China, just the huge progression and huge growth that we're going to see of people traveling, migrating from India, both for short, personal and short term as well as for long term. And so how are you prepared as a small, as a country to be able to welcome guests from these different areas who have different habits, who have different modes that they like to travel together on? How do you design your facilities to be able to accommodate those guests? Another big growing area is coming from Indonesia. And they are hugely dependent upon air traffic because they're islands. And you can't, you basically to get around those islands, you don't have a lot of boat traffic, you actually have a lot of air traffic. And they're going to be hitting the ground running and traveling all around the world significantly as well. So it's pretty interesting to start to see these trends, these changes. You have these third world countries that are really going to be starting to explode in terms of their wanting to and their visiting and learning about the rest of the world. And on the kind of challenging side of this is the fact that worldwide tourism accounted for about 8% of the global greenhouse gas emissions from 2009 to 2013, making it, the sector, a bigger polluter than the construction industry. And a lot of people really don't think about that. Now, this is not all about airports and airlines, but a lot of it, the majority of this is associated with that. This also takes into account impacts from trains, cars, as well as hotels. But the big impact really comes from aviation. And why is that? Well, if you look at airports, which happens to be a specialty area of mine, they are big energy consumers. The daily electricity and thermal energy, so gas for heating, for a large airport compares to that of a city of 100,000 people. It's big. It uses a lot of energy to operate. And, but there are lots of things that we are doing to help reduce those impacts. Because I think it's going to be a long time before we actually have sustainable, renewable fuels, carbon-free airplanes. It's going to take us a while. But there's a ton of stuff that we can be doing on the ground at these facilities to really reduce the carbon impacts of the operations. At GENSLER, way back when in 2000, when we started to really kind of pay attention to the energy performance of projects, we redid the Jackson Hole Airport, which is a beautiful airport. This is a big ski country in Wyoming, but it's a small little airport. And this, we were really focusing on both energy efficiency, renewable choice or clean energy, and also using timber construction, so using wood for construction, because as we know, I think you all know, the carbon footprint of timber is much less than that of steel and concrete. And for this project, we are basically able to improve the energy performance, about 17% over the baseline, and that also the airport had committed to basically sourcing 70% of its energy as clean energy. And that was, again, this was almost 20 years ago. That was pretty unheard of. People, that the whole idea of buying renewable or clean energy wasn't really known, and we really helped kind of move that forward. We then had, when I came onto GENSLER, we had the opportunity, to redo Terminal 2, which was the original central terminal at SFO, at San Francisco Airport. And this was one of the first projects where LEED was really had gotten into airports, and we were one of the first projects that actually got LEED certification. I got LEED Gold for this project. And our energy savings basically was 15% better than the California Energy Code at that point in time, which was still pretty progressive. And I love this quote by Richard Branson. This is one of the few terminals in America where you arrive and you think it's going to be a great day. And this is, again, something that's really important as you start to think about how do we invite our guests? How do we make them happy, right? When you think about, like, from an airport or a rail station or a bus station, their first real interaction on the ground with your country, how do you celebrate that? How do you make it really inviting and making it a delight so people say, I want to be there. I feel immediately comfortable. This is going to be a great trip because I'm welcomed when I arrive. We need to be paying attention to that. We then had we have the opportunity right now, which is the project I'm deep into, and this is the renovation of Terminal 1, which is the large another large terminal at the airport. And here we were focusing on energy efficiency, but also the idea of going all electric, which you're hearing more and more and more about. We want to decarbonize our energy sources. We're using a real renewable energy. It's much easier for us to do that if we go electric than it is if we were still heavily rely on gas. We're sourcing certified greenhouse gas-free electricity, and then also starting to look at the carbon issues of materials, because it's not just about the carbon associated with the power or the energy for your buildings. It also is the carbon associated with the production of those materials, which can be significant. So you start with doing, and we're getting better and better and better at this, really analyzing, saying, what is the performance? What are our goals from an energy perspective? How is it working? And this particular project, it's actually the renovation of an existing terminal. It's currently using the energy, that's what's called energy use intensity, which is a global way that we define how much energy gets used, at 179 kBTUs per square foot per year. This is our Terminal 2 project. We have brought it down to 145. This is the industry average at 126. The airport had said we were going to target, for contract, say we want it to be 85, including what they call process energy. This is all that stuff that's used that's not traditional building, like your baggage handling systems, like your checkpoint security. Those use up a lot of energy. If we take that out and we just consider the building, about 65, so that's for heating, cooling, ventilation. And then if we wanted to get to net zero, because we could generate enough on site, we had to be down at 20. From 179 down to 20. That's a pretty significant reduction in energy use. A nice little challenge. But we did look at a whole bunch of different technologies. What could we really do? We identified 10 major ones. Displacement ventilation, so it's no longer pushing air from the ceiling down. It's actually bringing in air at low velocities gently across the room, using radiant heating and cooling, which you are all probably very familiar with. It's kind of that technology, particularly hot heated floors, came from this area. Building enclosure, making sure that everything's sealed up properly. You're not leaking. You're not losing a lot of energy through your windows and your doors. They have the fact that we have LED everywhere. So like lighting, as a designer, you should just say, okay, we're just going LED. We're not even going to talk about it. We're just going there. Just do it. Got that? Heat recovery central plant. So this is actually where we're using the waste heat from the chilling operations to make hot water rather than having to boil gas or burn gas to boil water, to make hot water. A high efficiency baggage handling system, the Internet of Things, wireless everywhere. We have controls and sensors on everything, so we're not having to condition area, heat or cool it when there's nobody there. That's another thing. We waste a lot of energy conditioning space when it's not being used. Why are we doing that? We don't need to. Efficient elevators and escalators, they're getting better and better and better. The whole idea of dynamic glazing, smart glass, that can actually tint and help to control glare and help to reduce excessive heat load. And then, of course, renewable energy, PVs all over the place. So really significantly reducing our energy impact. And then I mentioned looking at materials. So this is where we started to do deep dive into the carbon footprint associated with the materials in the project. And this is a big airport, 770,000 square feet. It's a big structure. So we're going to have a lot of steel and a lot of concrete. We were able to be very smart in how we designed, the kind of steel we designed, so we could actually source our steel predominantly from North America, and that has a much lower carbon footprint than if we were to source our steel, for example, from China. And if we wanted to do really fancy big jumbo members, the only places they're manufactured is China, so you're forced to do that. So let's be smarter about how we design so we can source local and lower carbon footprint. Being smarter about our concrete mix design, so we are really tying it to purpose. We're not prescriptively saying you're going to have to use this many pounds of cement. We're saying here's the performance. We need to have it hardened at this rate by this many days, and then let the concrete suppliers be smart about putting the mix together to reduce its carbon footprint. So we were able to go from, the baseline was about 52,000 tons of CO2 emissions we estimated. With our design, we brought it down to 41,000, 42,000, saving 10,000 tons of CO2 just from the materials going into the project, reducing the carbon footprint close to 20%, which we think is pretty good. Putting that all together in terms of our road to carbon zero for SFO, basically we calculated that as traditional baseline design would result in both the operating energy as well as the materials going into the building at about 593 pounds of CO2 per square foot over its 50-year life. As we designed it, both from an operating energy efficiency perspective as well as materials, we brought it down to 124. So this project, we've reduced the total carbon footprint over its 50-year life by 79%, which we think is pretty good. Not to zero, but a whole lot of, really, really, really far down. And it is by using all standard technologies and processes and design thinking that are in use today. This is nothing overly fancy, right? But it's just the correct thinking about it, designing about it, planning for it in advance that we're able to deliver on this kind of performance. And we need to be actively all working together to do this for all these kinds of projects, to really reduce the carbon footprint, because again, we know the mobility we're going to reduce the carbon footprint of transportation, but we can do it in buildings right now. So why don't we? Back to the regional economic impact, this airport basically results in direct total employment between the airport, visitor spending, it's all the concessions, and aviation exports of 165,000 people in the Bay Area. With then kind of the indirect labor of suppliers of goods and services and respending of income, estimated that we impact the employment of 300,000 people in San Francisco, and actually helping to deliver $62 billion in revenue to the Bay Area economy, which is pretty impressive. And you can be doing the same thing for each of your own countries when you really start to look and say, how do we design, how do we encourage, we want people to come visit. And whether they're coming back to visit family or whether they're just be coming back to come and learn and enjoy our architecture, enjoy our food, and enjoy the environment, understand the history, you can be doing a lot to really positively impact your communities. And basically that's kind of summarizing leveraging global mobility. tourism, and sustainability for local prosperity. Thank you.